And so the basically the rites of passage, which this was a really interesting point. It's rites,
Hmm.
as in it is.
A rite is like a ceremonial thing, right? An rite.
That's right. It's a ritual,
A ritual, yes.
not as in you have a right to
Yeah.
something.
Not like a civil right or a, yeah, not a RIGHT. Yes.
That's right.
Yep.
That's correct. um, but when you go through, I'll totally butcher his name, Van Gamp or something to that effect.
Okay.
When you read through his work, what's interesting about it is there's several different rites of passage examples that are shared.
Hmm.
And even down to one of the ones that I used as an example was coming together for food and drink, because the process of coming together in most uh, cultures, coming together for food and drink is really about incorporating two different people's lives together
Hmm.
and going through this transformative event where you share information and you learn something new and you go through this process. Whereas if I was just to bring you food and not sit down and break bread with you, that's just a gift.
Hmm.
That's not a rite of passage. It's not something that transforms you in any way.
Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, there should be plenty of examples probably of rites of passage. I kind of want to delve a little bit more into that. What more rites of passage? Yeah, a ceremonial event existing in all historically known societies.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, which that's a perfect example that you just said, because everybody comes together and eats.
Well, and I was like, what a perfect, I mean, I wrote about that specifically because we've got Thanksgiving coming up, right?
Right? Yep.
And I mean, look at, especially with all the impeachment stuff going on,
Hmm.
there's been so many articles and so much talk about how many people have this, very anxious feeling about this year's Thanksgiving because they believe that it's going to be very transformative compared
Hmm.
to Thanksgiving's past because of what's going on in our society.
Right. Very much so.
There's
Uh,
another video that's the tribal jazz man, and this is more talking about that transformation between adolescence and adulthood.
hmm.
And what I really appreciated about this video was there is an element of that, the significance that so many different cultures give to that transition from adolescence to adulthood, that many cultures, for example ours, unless you have a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah or a sweet 16
Hmm.
or something to that effect, if you don't have that, he said there's a lot of people where you'll see adults get stuck in this sort of prolonged phase of adolescence. So adults will do very infantile type actions and activities and reactions to things that are going around them, similar to the way, and I loved this language. He said it's like the transition of an older to become an elder. Of course,
Hmm.
you get older, but it is that transition and that transformation of when you become an elder where you are able then to share the knowledge that you had
Right.
absorbed and experienced. And
Hmm. So basically, so that's, you're saying it states that cultures that are without that rite of passage that entails, like you said, like a bar mitzvah or like those kind of life, or like for us, like you said, what was it, like sweet 16 or something? There's all those things that like kind of like symbolize, or even I would even say sometimes almost a rite of passage is like, at least in our culture here at least here in the United States, it's like, most kids can get their license by 16. That's its own rite of passage. You finally got your car. So it's like, it's a step forward. 21 obviously is very much, it's, we all know with 21, that's a big thing. And then those are two big monumental, probably, would you deem those as probably rites of passage in their own? Um,
Absolutely.
uh,
Our society, I think, culturally dictates that those are for sure.
yeah, exactly. A um was it for, so for like a lot of Amish people, it's, what do you call it, Rumspringer, I think it's called, or have you ever, I don't
Yeah.
know if there's probably not many Amish, not probably, the more west you go, there's probably less and less Amish population, or is there Amish out west?
There aren't as many.
Mm-hmm.
On the West Coast, there's huge swaths of Mennonite, which
Mm-hmm.
are very similar set of customs to the Amish people, just not as rigid.
Yeah,
They typically will have cars, but they still don't, they don't take pictures and things like that.
right.
But no, you're right. There's the
When you turn that, I think it's when you turn 18.
Well, and that's something that's so interesting. And one of the examples that I wrote about was the symbolism of in the Jewish faith
Uh-huh.
using the mezuzah on the door,
Mm-hmm.
the small where you wave your hand over it and you kiss your fingers and you
Mm-hmm.
say a very specific sort of chant or mantra or whatever you'd like to call it. But for me, I think there's so many more in our society religious rites of passage versus cultural rites of passage.
Exactly. That's a very good point. You're saying there's more religious based, yeah, rites of passage.
Yes.
um yeah, which, like I said, and then we probably touched, like we said, turning 21 and getting your license would be more of a cultural
Right. Whereas
rite
in
of passage, what we, yeah,
of the world, those cultural rites of passage include like very specific ceremonies.
exactly.
Um,
Yeah, we're like, at least within the United States itself, there, I feel like there's not an incredible amount of ceremonial rites of passages
no,
here.
even like a quinceañera, right?
Yeah.
That's not necessarily a religious.
Uh-huh.
Uh, that's not the heart of it. It is a cultural.
Right. Because like, graduation is cultural, in its own right, I guess. Or I mean you could,
Right.
you could choose to tie religion into, like, if you went to like a, private Catholic school or something, I'm sure there would be very much a, your graduation would be much more, bound with a more culture, or with more of a religious, because it's a passage into your adulthood. For a lot of people, once they, kids right out of high school go and get their degree, and then they're going into the working world as adults. So that's its own kind of rite of passage. Um,
And that's the other piece I think that's really interesting to look at is, okay, how does this translate to the business world? Because I really think that in our professional lives and in our business world,
mhm,
there are so many rites of passage that I personally have never looked at in that way.
mhm.
For example, I mean, it's really difficult, I think, for somebody who, let's say, works in a manufacturing plant that's never worked on the line. Like, there's a rite of passage for them to have to spend some time working on the line before they can supervise the people that are doing that work.
Right. Right. Yep. Yep. The whole, entry. Well, you're entering into a, yeah, new job. I mean, that's even for people who, and you mentioned manufacturing, even for like degree, like if you're coming in with a degree and you're working in a new job, a lot of times these people will step in with, even if you have a prestigious degree, and sometimes they'll step in and be like, okay, but you're working from the bottom up just like everyone else once you're here. Um, and the seniority, people who have like tenure, those are the people who've had the rite of passage, so they've gone past that, so they're, I what's an example? I know if you worked for like a logistics company like UPS or USPS, like a lot of those people, you don't get to, a lot of those people when they start out, they have to be the people who are like sorting packages and loading that stuff up. You don't get to be the person driving the truck until you have seniority. Like that's like a thing that you have to work up to. So, rite of passage, that exactly what you're saying.
I mean, the military is another good place to look at that, right? I mean, my sister had an associate's degree when she joined the army, so
Mhm.
she was far more high ranking. Can you hang on just 1 second for me? I'm sorry.
No, absolutely. You're fine.
Sorry about that, Jason. I had a
No,
kid calling me.
oh no, you're absolutely fine. You're
Um,
absolutely fine.
anyways, I was saying that my sister had already gotten her associates while she was in high school. So when she joined the army, she came in at a higher rank
Hmm.
than if you would have just, walked in off of the street without that educational background.
Hmm.
And for me, I think that that's what's an interesting component of this rites of passage is that what what is what identifying what it is that makes that is the qualifying criteria to move through those phases, the preliminal, liminal, and postliminal.
Hmm. Maybe it's, I don't, with that said, I think maybe from rite of passage to rite of passage, it's different too. It's not the same. It's not the same formula to to do that. I mean, like we were saying earlier, like getting your driver's license is, yeah, we said it's a cultural rite of passage, but you're not getting it at 14, 13, or 14. You're not going to get it. They will not give it to you. Granted, whereas you're talking in your military example, if you're going to go into the military, you technically have control over the fact of if you were going in there with like a degree or not. If you could technically have control over that. It's not.
Yeah.
Whereas you don't have any control over, like I said, if you're 13 years old and you really want to drive a car, they're not going to let you.
Well, and you can really want to drive a car. You can be 16, you can take the class, you can do all of those things, but you have
Mhm.
to take a test.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then yeah, get past that. Yep. Is your sister still in the military, by the way?
No, she's not. She
Okay.
ended up as a lieutenant.
Okay. Gotcha. Did she? Was that when she was younger?
Yeah,
Okay, gotcha. What branch was she in? Like Army?
yeah.
Okay. Um. Yeah. Because yeah, I know if, yeah, you're right though. If you do with a degree, I think you go in, if you have a degree, you'll a bachelor's especially. You can go in as like an officer ranking, right, when you step
Exactly.
in. Yep.
Exactly. And I mean, there's other rites of passages where there's those types of elements to it. You can move through the stages in various ways depending on your experience.
Hmm.
And to me, that's what's a more interesting part of this rites of passage conversation is that whatever it is, the rite of passage, whatever rite of passages we are examining, I think it's so fascinating to look at the purpose of it
Hmm.
more than anything else. Like, okay, there's some cultures where you have to get a tattoo and you have to have a fight and you have to do all these things to be a man, right?
Hmm.
All of those components in the rites of passages, the three phases, they're interesting to me, but not as interesting as the fact of they believe once you make it through those three phases, that's when you're a man, not before.
Yeah.
right?
Yep, absolutely.
Specific stages, whatever
Hmm.
it looks like. And like in the professional world, I'm just using this as an example. I
Hmm.
have my insurance licenses, so I can sell insurance products and some financial planning products and investment products. And so you have to go through these specific trainings and take these specific tests and blah blah blah, and then at the end you're supposed to be really knowledgeable and be able to sell these insurance products, right?
Hmm.
That just is not the reality of it.
No, not at all.
Not even close.
Hmm.
So I feel like what you're really doing is getting yourself to a place where somebody will an insurance company would be willing to talk to you, to
Right.
teach you,
Hmm.
to take you on as um I'm sorry, I'm going to put you on hold one more time.
No, you are absolutely fine. Don't worry.
Okay. So, anyways, I'm sorry I interrupted you. You were going to say something.
Um, Remind me what you were. Oh, we were just talking about. You were talking about like where you get to a point where like they want to talk to you or they take you on. I don't know if I was expanding on what you're saying. You were in the middle of.
I was sorry.
No,
No,
you're fine. No, you were. I think you were in the middle of stating something, if I can remember it.
yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
I remember it now too. Anyways, what I was going to say is that then the rite of passage becomes that you're just simply now an attractive candidate for somebody to teach you something.
Right.
Similar to when you go into the army, if you've got some education under your belt, you still have no idea how to be a soldier,
Right.
but now you're a little bit more attractive candidate.
Hmm.
And so they give you a reward in the language they speak, which is rank and
Hmm.
compensation
Exactly.
associated with it.
Exactly. Exactly. Um, I mean, working at Starbucks, like they've been pushing me to want to do like store management for a while, and I've been back and forth. I like I mean, I'm very close to finishing, school. And so I'm at a crossroads where I could commit to that. Or if I waited just like, because I should be done by the end of this coming semester, like summer should be done. And so part of me is like, well, if I hold off a little longer, I can have a whole open option. But I talked to my store manager recently and she's like, well, you don't have to you don't have to have a degree to step into store management. But she's like, if you have it, you can negotiate higher pay
Mhm.
like you instantly with that. So kind of the whole, the idea of like that's their language. Like we are going to compensate you in our language how we know how, which is we're gonna structure you with probably higher pay because of having that.
Exactly.
Yeah, just kind of like what you said with the military, how that works.
And that's what's so fascinating to me about this rites of passage conversation in the professional realm is that I don't necessarily think that we look at it this way, but there is a whole ritual to so many components of our professional life that
Hmm.
I don't know that we really look at. I don't.
Hmm.
I mean, even like the interview process, right?
Yeah.
Your preliminal phase is you're just trying to get your foot in the door to be able to say something other than whatever you've got on your resume.
Right. Right.
And right now in our world, that is like a huge feat
Hmm.
because everything's electronic.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's, we don't, even have like the kind of applications for jobs are simply like not even, you don't see a face half the time. They're like, go to this website, apply for it, and then the next time you see a person, you're in your interview, they have already a printed off, paper of your resume, and they've already reviewed it before they even sat down with you. And so they've already collected all their ideas on you from a sheet of paper.
From a sheet of paper.
Hmm. Right.
And
Which, and that's that human element, like really, it really takes a hit on it there, how that's structured. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned interviews. I think interviews are like a super um important. I mean, I've done quite a bit of interviewing, in the past, and I would say I'm like a self-proclaimed like a pretty good interviewer. I would imagine you seem like you would be pretty good too. Some people I know get super, nervous, like it's a very high anxiety thing for
hope.
them.
I
Um,
said to my friend today, she's like, I got this interview for this job, but I actually don't want it. And I'm like, that's fantastic. You have to go.
right, exactly, right, yeah. Is it because is it more like the anxiety of going through the interview? Yeah. Um, and and I do feel for people who that is just a natural struggle for them, where because like we said, not everyone struggles from that. Me and you talked about last time we were on here, we both are like public speakers. We like the whole, like, we both enjoy that. But just the like, and for me, I always, when it comes to like that whole interviewing and the whole idea of trying to put a humanity aspect to it, I try to, because you know how usually when you're going through an interview, it's like they tend to ask you these like cookie cutter questions off of a paper. Describe a time when, that everyone knows the describe a time when. And I do whatever I can to just like steer, and even as an interviewer myself, I've interviewed people before at work, and I try to like, half the time I just throw those questions out. Like, I'm like, I don't even want to ask you these questions. Like, I'm number one, I'm going to be so bored asking you these questions. Uh,
Exactly.
I'm going to be so incredibly bored. And I don't think a lot of that is really exemplary of what makes a really like, what makes, I mean, there are some intangibles that you can look at. What's your job history and such? But I think there's a lot of those questions that don't really look at what makes you a good candidate for a job. I think there's other things that you can get a better feel for, but yeah, I think an interview, so kind of thinking, as you said, like an interview being the preliminary um aspect, and it's um and so in a sense, are we kind of saying that an interview is its own rite of passage in its own sense, right?
Absolutely.
It gives you the right to move into this career. You've now passed this ceremonial. It's very ceremonial. An
It,
interview is, so yeah.
you just said, I mean, you get these cookie cutter list of questions.
Hmm.
How many times have you actually sat across from somebody who just point blank drills through them, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
that is not how the ceremony usually goes.
No, exactly. It goes. They might ask you one that gets the ball rolling. I feel like that's more of like get the ball rolling, and then from there you kind of just go off script,
And
right?
I was saying to my friend today, I'm like, okay, don't forget, this is sales 101.
Yeah.
People buy from whom they like. So
Mhm.
just make them like you.
Right.
Walk in the
Right.
room, look around. If they have pictures of their kids, talk about your kid. If they
Right.
have pictures of a dog, talk about your dog. Like,
Right.
they will buy from whom they like. So just offer a product that you think appeals to their likes.
Right. Right.
I
Yeah.
think that so much of this rites of passage is that very component. I mean, even looking at the act of touching the mezuzah to walk in and out of a house in a Jewish home. I mean, I wrote down what they say. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth evermore. I'm not particular. I don't have a religion that I subscribe to or have any faith-based feelings or emotions. So for me, this is just purely looking at it in an analytical way, which is
Hmm.
this thing is hanging there so that they can have good luck.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
right?
which for it's probably super like intriguing to you, like that's like the thought of, and is that something they do every single time they?
Every single time.
Just to think about that, like think about how that would be like. That would be if you didn't do that in your regular day life. That would be life changing to have to do that every time you enter in and out of your house.
It is huge.
Every time. Yeah.
And I look at that and I think, okay, like in our lives that may not have these sort of rituals attached to them,
Hmm.
these rites of passages are still like so prevalent. And that's what's fascinating to me the most about this entire conversation is when you start to drill down what is truly a rite of passage if you just look at it at those three stages, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Whatever it is that you prepare to do, you're in the middle of it, and then how you've been transformed or changed
Hmm.
once that activity is complete.
Yep.
And
Hmm.
what's fascinating to me about all of this is that every single one of these rites of passage in my mind has to do with this idea of improving oneself,
Hmm. Yep.
whatever it is,
Yep.
even
It's
in death. The process of a funeral is to help this body go to the next plane or right to improve your situation. I mean, you're dead.
yes.
So your
Right. Yeah.
situation is got to be improved in some kind of,
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a good point. It's always it's a building, like you said, it's a building thing. It's never per se like a negative, if you will. It's a bettering, yeah, building yourself. Um, you never. I mean, I guess if you're a rites of passage for joining cultist actions or something, maybe that's like
mind when you're in the middle of it, it's still you think you're improving
you're better. Yeah, you're better. Yeah, when you if you're objective about that, yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's really, yeah, and it's, yeah. There are still so many. As much as we don't have it, like we talked about, like religious rites of passage as much that are prevalent in the U.S.
Mhm.
It's just, yeah, it's really intriguing that the rest of the world is so
Steeped
it's
in
so
it.
so prevalent. Yeah, like Eastern culture. Eastern culture is just fascinating with like it's much more idol based in terms of the religion, more the gods and such, and I'm sure there's a plethora of just rites of passages that are
It's
steeped in that culture too.
Austria. I mean, Austria is a very Catholic country.
Hmm.
They have so many holidays where literally all the businesses are closed down, nobody works. There are tons and tons of holidays that all have these very Catholicism based reasons
Hmm.
that people do not know. They'll
Yeah,
have special holidays and you'll ask somebody, what does this day mean? And they're like, well, I don't know. I mean, it's
I
just,
just know I know I don't have to go to work or
that's right.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. That's really wild. Um, yeah.
What makes me sad about that is that I think in our own country, we have some of that too. And I mean, for example, Veterans Day. How many people truly spend Veterans Day thinking about veterans?
No,
People,
usually yeah. Usually just an excuse to like, or just like Memorial Day is the same way. Excuse to have people over and grill out and just like hang out with friends. But no, yeah, you're right. No one really spends that much time actually thinking about what the day entails. Even the 4th of July, I don't think like as a country, like you think more about, oh, we're just gonna go watch fireworks and do
that,
this. You don't really think like you probably don't consciously sit there and think, oh, this is our country's independence. Like, yeah, maybe it's slightly in the back of your mind, but you don't spend the time just like really dwelling on that. You
that's
just
right.
are excited because you don't have to work, and yeah, yeah, and that's fine, and that is probably very um similar across a lot of cultures. Like you said, in Austria, it's probably that's the same thing. They kind of,
And what's fascinating about this conversation, again, to bring it back into the professional realm,
yep.
look at how many businesses have these bizarre, archaic processes that you're just like, why do you guys do this?
Hmm.
I mean, it's just what we've always done.
Right. Yep. Yep. It's don't change the formula.
Don't change the formula. It's how,
Yep.
when I got here, this is how it started. I did this. This is the way I've always done it. And it's
Right.
a rite of passage. You
It's
do
like
it.
if it works and it's somehow like regardless how you got there and it works, so like, well, I guess that's good enough for me. It worked ultimately, even if there's more efficient ways. Well, like we're still gonna, yeah, yeah, that is very true in the professional realm. That is such a, uh,
Prevalent.
yeah, so prevalent.
In terms of the rites of passage, I think that there is a significant portion of this conversation that has to be dedicated to you do it because it's the way it's been done.
Hmm.
And you
Yeah.
don't question that. You don't challenge the process on that. It is a
Hmm.
rite of passage. It's the way it's been done.
Right. I mean, that's kind of how schooling in its own was for a long time. You just you finish school, you just go in 4 years of college. Like you don't question it. You just that's what you do. I
Right.
mean, I think that has become a little bit more of a polarizing area now in modern day. But thankfully, I'm happy I have the opportunity to be doing this
Exactly.
with the aid of obviously Starbucks. But like, yeah, it's but that's kind of like people that used to not question. Like people of more my parents' generation would be like, that's just what you do. You get your schooling. Like it's not a question if you should get schooling or not. You do it.
Yeah.
You go. You further your education, and then you're off into the working world. Whereas now we're kind of a little bit that has changed a little bit. It's a little bit more now. People are like, there's other avenues and such a and
But did they change it because there are other avenues, or did they make other avenues because they had to change it because too many people can't afford it?
probably a mixture of both. It's probably a blend of both of those, I would imagine.
I would
Yeah,
imagine as well.
yeah.
I which the reason I think we can so easily imagine it too is because there's a time in our not so distant history where children weren't even going to school because they had to work on the farm.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, that would be within the last 120 years probably. Yeah.
Right. I mean, and I think that's what's again so fascinating about this rite of passage is how much of it is just autopilot activity
Hmm. Right.
versus you actually critically thinking about the phases that you're walking through in order to transform yourself intentionally,
Hmm. Yep.
not just because it is the way it's always been done or because I have to.
Right. Makes me think more of like, because I mean, me and you both still have rites of passages coming up. Like you're going to be dealing with rites of passages in your life throughout your whole life. There's just different points. Makes you think that the next kind of point that you're at makes you now this conversation makes you want to kind of assess that more of like what actually is going on here, like what is, instead of just simply, oh yep, this is, I know my dad did it, I know my other siblings did it who are older than me, okay, now I'm gonna do it. Like, and there's some out there too, like I was actually just looking up, I had looked up some examples of rites of passage, and then there's some cultures where they're just absolutely wild, rites of passage, it's like involving like, I don't know, like stand in a pit of snakes or something. Who knows? Like, like you're gonna go do that. Like, in some more like tribal cultures and stuff like that. Their rites of
Nobody
passage.
questions that. It's
What
the
was that?
nobody questions that. It's
Yeah.
the way it's done.
Whereas for us, if someone told us to go do that right now, we'd be like, no, no, I'm not doing that. Like,
No,
but being immersed in your specific culture and that's how it's always been done, you don't question it. You absolutely.
that in itself is a rite of passage to be able to think for yourself and make a declaration of what you are willing and not willing to do.
Hmm.
And not everybody gets that rite of passage.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, questioning it obviously within some, um, probably within some cultures. I mean, probably some cultures it's kind of risky to question rites of passage. It's probably like if you're someone who's like, I don't see why I have to do this. I don't, you know,
That's right.
excommunication from whatever like it could come with that. Um, Creating that like especially I bet you like a lot of like religious based rites of passage would find that a lot. Like if you were just like, I'm not willing for this, then maybe the church is like, well, we're not willing to have you part of it, or whatever the case is. um
What's fascinating to me about that, and this is a personal opinion, but I look at so many of those rites of passages that have those non-negotiable components.
mhm,
I feel that the more crazy, wild, and for no reason rites of
mhm.
passages are usually far more rigid and have
Yeah,
insane consequences.
it's almost like those rites of passage are there for not so we talked about, and usually it is for bettering. Now this is really interesting that we're getting this because we had earlier just talked about usually it's for bettering yourself.
Right.
um and maybe it's sometimes, I think the majority are for bettering yourselves, but maybe in some scenarios, it's possible that that's what's sold to you, that it's bettering yourself. Maybe not all the time. Maybe that bettering yourself is like a facade of what it is. Um,
Betterment in
but
the eye of the beholder, right?
yeah, but sometimes it's maybe really just a matter. In some scenarios, those really rigid ones that don't make sense, or maybe those rites of passage are there more for like control reasons, just for controlling. Um,
That's right.
yeah, just to have control. I'm like I'm not doing this because it's going to it's going to better you as a person. It's going to better us as a group. But it shows that since you're going to do this for me, it shows that I have control over you in a sense.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a darker side to rites of passage too. Maybe that does exist. Um, like we said, like usually we are, I think it's in the right assessment. Maybe if we changed it to rites of passages are either truly are about bettering yourselves, or at least are sold as bettering yourself too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I
So,
definitely think there's a darker side to it, right? I mean,
mhm.
standing in a pit full of snakes might be a rite of passage in some cultures, but there are people that will die. Like that didn't better them.
Right. Oh, you know what, that's a really, about like Spartan culture, right? What they would do with their children.
No.
So back like um with Sparta, what they would do is they would take their their like their boys, like their baby, like when they would have a baby boy, they would take them and they would leave them out in the wilderness on the hillside, like right after they were born, and just leave them out there, for like, I don't know, it's like 2 or 3 days. And if they came back and it was and the child had survived being on its own out there, then it was deemed worthy to be like a Spartan warrior.
Are
And
you
that's Yeah, and that was like the rite of passage for them to. And if they didn't survive, then they were. And like that was in a time when like we talk about modern gender roles. Like that was a time when literally if you were a male, your one job, your use was to be like a warrior. So if you were a male and you didn't survive when they put you out on there, then you weren't worthy of living. Like that was basically it. And so like that would be, that's like a rite of passage in a sense, which really makes no sense.
not?
Like just because you're able as a baby to get lucky enough to survive, which that's really what it would probably come down to.
Oh,
Not that they were actually that strong to
they're not
survive that.
willing to preserve their life. They're
They're-
literally, it's luck.
yeah, they're not going to be able to fight off a wild animal that would come after them or something. They're not going to be, so really, but that's what they viewed it as. And so that was like a rite of passage into being being that you're going to be like, you're going to grow up to be a warrior. And if you weren't a warrior, then you had no place in society. Like
Isn't it
for,
this whole rite of passage conversation? And when you read the Van Gamp piece, it'll be interesting to you to see some of the examples in there, because there is a lot that is, in my opinion, bananas.
Hmm.
And what I always find so fascinating about this is how easily people will accept these and adopt these.
Uh-huh.
In one of my classes, we were having some conversation about how it's really frustrating in a get answers quick society when you can't get an answer quick.
Hmm.
And I just simply said, I totally disagree, because I did not have a get answer quick upbringing. You had to look up an encyclopedia, and you had to go to the card index at the library and look things up. And
Hmm.
it's like you had to verify information.
Right. Right.
Simply just looking up something on Google and saying that, oh, that's the answer, seems so wrong to me, because how do you know?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and there's so much to, that's a whole another thing. The sifting through what is real and what's not on the internet, and yeah, like, oof.
And I feel like now it's become a rite of passage for people to get some kind of information off the internet, share it with other people, and then find out it was a lie.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and that's that one. That's like when we've touched on like social media. If you talk about Facebook, even like, and I hear it, and I always laugh. Like whenever my mom, I'll see my mom, and she'll approach me, and she'll like, "Did you hear about this?" And I listen to it, and I like kind of just take in what she says, and I'm like, where'd you read this article at? And then she reveals where it came from, and like, I'm like, that's enough. Like that, like I figure out where that source came in, and that's an example of people literally they see something that appeals to them. It's either something they agree with, they like, they don't verify, they just click, share it with people, and this is my viewpoint too. Like this is information that is fact, and I'm going to put it out there, and then and like, and people are so quick now with that.
So quick to do it. And it has literally become a rite of passage
Hmm.
for people to recognize, oh my gosh, I spread that fake news or those fake articles or that fake information. And
Right.
I fear that the only way to make them not do that is they have to have a scare, which is so insane to me. It's like, I don't need to know that the iron is hot not to touch it. Like, I don't have to get burned.
Right. Right.
You need this in order to stop doing that nonsense, right?
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
how can we change the rite of passage for you to just say, oh, somebody in the world got in big trouble for sharing false information, and that's good enough of a rite of passage for me. I'm going to start verifying everything I read.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And it's so like, and I can't imagine being by the way being like a professor in the modern day of like with all the information that you get sent at you that like you don't know where some of these students are pulling this information from, whatever the case is. And like I feel like being and I'm sure there's so many advantages with the internet of being a professor now, and the but
Undoubtedly.
also thinking back 50 years ago at the same time and being like, if people are coming with this information, you knew one of two things. You knew either they did the time, they like literally physically cracked open the books, went to the library, and were pulling this information, or number two, they just made it up.
That's
There
right.
was there was no other area that there wasn't the whole element of the internet where there's information that is relevant, that is factual, that is real, and then there's stuff that you don't know. And then as a professor, you have to take the time to make sure and sift through the fact that if that's real or not, you know.
What's interesting about this conversation is, and I mean, let's just use Christopher Columbus as an example.
Hmm.
You and I both grew up believing that he's a hero, right?
Right.
I mean, he did amazing things. And Andrew Jackson is another example. Like, he was a
Hmm.
president, his face is on money, there's monuments to him everywhere. Those people were murderers.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, they didn't just like kill a few people. They slaughtered the Native American people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing, is that there's also this element of, part of this rite of passage has to be recognizing that sometimes you will be told truths or you will be given information, but it's partial.
Partial. Yeah.
And so then with that, you still have to verify, or you still have to ask yourself, you know, what was the cost for their accomplishment? Or ask yourself some of those other questions, like what we're doing here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, okay, you get a 10 for being a great employee because you show up on time, but can you describe an instance where you failed, or an employee of yours failed, and how did you help them grow? Right?
Right.
Because I wouldn't want to hire the person that can just say, yeah, I've had employees fail and I helped them out.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like,
right.
verifiable information that shows me that you walked through the rites of passage in order to lead someone in a way that touched upon enabling another to act, and modeling the way. And you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, you want the, you can't, I mean, you want that, you want to see that progress, or you want to see that whole process. It's not enough, I guess, in a sense, yeah, for someone to say, yeah, I've helped them. That's it. Yeah, like that's just not enough. Like
Yeah.
anyone can just say that.
Yeah, you can ask those yes or no questions. It has to be telling.
Right. Yep. Do we want to start now? I think we've had a really good conversation. I think we've definitely put in a lot of good
Yeah.
conversation, I think, on Rite of Passage. We've got our 10 questions.
Yep.
And I'm sure, and I don't really see much of an issue with Daniela probably. And if she would, even if she wanted to, and we could, if we divvy up, because we were talking about divvying up the questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And kind of working on the annotations that go with them. Even if we could even give her the freedom that if she went under those certain sections on the ones she's working on, if she felt like she wanted to change a couple of them,
Totally.
and since she would be the one working on them, maybe we could, give her that freedom to do that.
Yeah.
But with that being said, there's three of us. There's 10 questions, so it's not going to be an equal division on working on those specific questions. But we do also have. Let me pull up the template again for this. For the business memo, they want the business memo format. Use the PDF document listed in this module as your main resource. Okay, for these questions, which is what we've been working off of. That's where we got all the questions from. The heart of your letter must be 10 qualitative questions. So you're more familiar with these business memos than me. So the heart is going to be once we get into the middle of the paper, I assume. Obviously, am I still sharing my screen with you, I assume?
Yes, you are.
Okay, that is still okay. So would we like they said, like we're doing it to a business, so would we kind of start out just exactly like they have here? Or are we going to send it to somebody? Would it be to the professor?
I think he says here that you can address your letter to whomever you want. Fictional or just people are fine. Invent the recipient's address and invent a return address for yourself.
Okay.
Which is interesting to me because a business memo does not contain that information, but that's fine.
Yeah. Which like this shows right here. There's not an address or return address showed on this one right here for sure.
Or business memo. So we'll do a memo.
Okay.
And
so right here, if you look on my screen on the Purdue Owl, it looks like do we start it with, it goes in here for the example talking about where it says market research and analysis show that the proposed advertising. So is that like what describes what the memo is going to entail? Is that kind of what that section is? Exactly. So we could be like, hey, this is, or we could, since we're sending it to a fake person, we could be like, hey, this is basically, in more professional words than just hey, but this is a 10 questionnaire or or yeah, questionnaire, blah, 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 regarding, you know, and what its goal is to achieve. Then we reach into the 10 questions, put that there with the annotations. And then I would imagine there's probably like a wrap up after that. There'd be like, I mean,
Yeah.
you have to conclude a memo after that.
Yeah, if you notice here, the conclusion is by refocusing our advertising efforts on our new line of clothing. So
Mhm.
we'll do something similar, you know, by adding these questions to our 360-degree questionnaire that we do annually to, you know, assess progress and et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
We'll be able to accomplish X, Y, Z.
Okay. Okay. Well,
Basically, this is to we're presenting a pitch for
okay.
why questions should be adopted.
Okay. So then it should be pretty basic. Then we have, going back to the top of this example here, we'll have the who it's going to with the to their address, the return address. We'll probably put the date, I'm sure, and then the subject like it shows here. We'll get our kind of intro, which will describe what's going to be happening, what the purpose of it is, do the 10 questions, and then kind of revisit the intro at the conclusion of wrapping and tying everything back together. Um, so in terms of dividing, like I said, we have 10 questions. We're three of us. I'm fine with taking on an extra question myself.
And
Um,
I'm fine with formatting the letter.
okay. Um, um, yeah, I can take, so, well, let me think about this. Three. So if we all three took three, and then I'll take four. I'll work four questions then. So
Yeah,
that, yeah, that'll put 10. So Danielle will have three, you'll have three. And then maybe we can put Daniela on after you format. She can possibly do like edit, just
yeah,
do like the edit on it,
that's a good idea.
the peer review. That's how we've been doing in my other course too. We've been doing a lot of papers together.
Mhm.
Have you taken OGL? Which one is it? OGL 355. Do you know
No,
if you've taken that one?
no, not yet. I think I'm actually taking that one in New Zealand.
Oh, you are? Okay. Yeah. So I'm doing that one right now. And that one is a Zoom meeting. Tonight's actually one of the rare nights that we're not doing. There's almost a Zoom meeting every night
Mm,
with that group. And we're like working on, and we're constantly, each module, we're working on a paper together because we're working in, um, uh, what is it? It's about organizations. And so you pick an organization as a group. And so we're in the nonprofit sector. So we're working on like for an organization that's nonprofit for human trafficking. And that's what we've been working on. So each paper we're building like an analysis of the company and break it down. It's really interesting.
yeah,
I'm sure you'll enjoy that. Lots of face-to-face time with your group. Um,
nice, isn't it?
yeah. So that's how we've been kind of doing it is, dividing up the work and then also having someone ultimately come through and like do the edit on it and the check. So maybe we'll have Danielle do the peer review. We'll have her do three questions. You're good for three questions and the formatting you said,
Uh-huh.
and then I'll just take straight up four questions.
That sounds great.
Okay. So that divvies up the workload. And I think this should be pretty straightforward to catch Daniela back up.
I do too. And we'll send her the video, of
Yep.
course.
Yep.
And then we'll connect tomorrow via email.
Okay. Yep. Yeah, because we haven't really done much. Like we've used the little group chat on Canvas, but we haven't really, outside of Zoom, we haven't really done much. Like haven't had a really routine like communication.
Right.
So I think now we need to step it up since we're getting a little bit more hefty load of work for the group.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
email works for me. Absolutely.
I'll put together an email to sort of summarize everything you and I have just talked about. And then
Okay.
tomorrow we'll all touch base with each other and make sure that everybody's feeling on target and that we're going to be
Okay.
able to accomplish this. It'll
Okay. Yeah.
also give some time to go back through everything one more time and make sure we haven't missed anything, because I think now that we've had a chance to talk about all this, I need to just go through it one more time.
You need to process it now.
Totally, right?
Yeah. Right. And I think and don't forget, I think like you said, there's some of those additional questions that were on the resource page that
Yes.
looked like that needed to be done, which those are probably done on individual, I think. Those
Yes.
look like those are individual work.
And I have started working on that, and it was really helpful
Okay.
conversation for sure.
Gotcha. All right. Yeah. And like I said, this weekend, obviously I'm pretty busy, but I think tomorrow night, and it helps that you guys are 2 hours behind me.
Yeah.
Time wise, that helps. It gives us more time, but, so I'll be in contact if there's, um, it shouldn't be a problem for me to communicate back and forth easily. And if we had to, like, tomorrow night, pull up like a ad hoc meeting or something again, Zoom meeting, even for that matter, I should be open, whatever the case is. So
And I don't have a problem using our golden ticket if we need to.
yeah, if we had to, yep.
I don't have a problem with that at all.
Okay. All
Okay.
right.
All right.
All
I'm
right.
recording now, and we'll talk more tomorrow.